It's a big weekend, and I don't have all the answers, right? I watch as much Colorado football as I can possibly do throughout the season. But, you know, I needed to bring on an expert who could really fill the gaps and give us some insight into what the fan base thinks, give us insight into what's going on in Dion's program, what he thinks the future holds for him, and really what the expectations are, at least from a Colorado perspective, for the game this weekend. So I was searching Colorado football news or updates when I was on YouTube. And I typically I gravitate towards fans or people who have their pulse on what's going on behind the scenes, not media outlets. I'm not too into reading or watching what the news people have to say. But I found this channel. It was called David Talks Buffs. And the guy resonated with me because he reminded me of my channel. He's a fan who started the channel. He got some traction, and now he puts out consistent content similar to what I do on Corn Crazed, going into the weeds about Colorado football. And there was a lot I could learn from him. So I thought, man, I should invite this guy into our show. The Corn Crazed audience would actually appreciate some of his perspective. So I reached out to him. He agreed, and now we've got him on. So I'm glad we have a guest who can give us some insight, and I'm glad that you guys can ask him questions. So if there are any questions that you guys have for our man David, you can put them up in our chat. I'll pull them up on the screen as I see fit, but I've got some outlined, and for now, I'm going to bring him into the show and get this one started. Let me click on my screen share. David, welcome to the show. Welcome to Corn Craze. This is the #1 Nebraska football, I'd say, fan community on YouTube. The fans here are diehard. We love Nebraska football, as you know how Nebraska fans are, and we know a lot about Colorado, but we want to know a little bit more, and that's why I wanted you here.
Honor. It's a huge honor to be with you talking about this matchup behind enemy lines. Thank you for having me. Can't wait to break down this matchup, man.
Yeah, did you go to the game last year? Do you go to many Colorado games?
Yes, thankfully, because the YouTube kind of took off a little bit, I was able to go to pretty much every home game last year aside from the Rocky Mountain Showdown. So, obviously, first half better than the second half, but it's a new year. No reason to focus on that too much. But yes, the environment was great, and yeah. Side note, I just hope we continue this rivalry, this matchup a little bit more often than what we got it now. Hopefully, this matchup on Saturday will encourage that.
You know, I appreciate the rivalry too. I think because it's gone on for so long. I looked back, they started playing, I think in the 1800s, like 1898. Nebraska actually started off on a 3-game win streak, but man, it's a long time and I would hate to see it die. You know, obviously conference realignment's changing some things, but it's fun because there's so much animosity between these two fan bases. It's a close proximity school, so that's what makes it really exciting.
Yeah, it feels great to be hated. We've been irrelevant for such a long time, and over the last couple years, that has changed a little bit. And it's nice to at least be part of the conversation, being looked forward to, and by other fan bases with matchups. And of course, I don't know how y'all feel about it, but at least with Colorado, this is the most important game of the year. I wouldn't prefer it any other way.
You know, the only argument Nebraska fans would have to the most important game of the year would be Iowa, because obviously that's the new kind of updated rival that they're in the Big Ten, and that game counts towards conference standings. But I think from an emotional standpoint, if you asked any Nebraska fan, this is the one game that they want to win. And I think the players might agree. This is a really big rivalry, and there's just a lot going on at Colorado that makes them, I don't want to say unlikable, but that makes you think, they kind of rub you the wrong way, or maybe some of the stuff that went down last year is something you want revenge for. And that's why Nebraska fans have that energy, I guess you can say, on Twitter and everywhere else on social media.
And it's funny, yeah. I think nationally, people would say that kind of this team, we do kind of lean into being the heel in some sense. Of course, then the fan base, we just view it as everybody else is the heel.
Yeah.
But this is a team with a lot of swagger, a lot of confidence. They're outspoken. Some might say outspoken too much for our record last year. But hey, that's what makes this stuff entertaining. It's about selling the fight. And I think that this game, just like last year, it could be a top 10, maybe even top 5 when it comes to the viewership. And now with Nebraska having a really exciting quarterback on the other side as well, I imagine everybody's going to be tuning in Saturday evening.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you just talked about selling the fight. Dion's whole deal is he knows how to promote his program. He knows how to get his brand out there. Obviously, he knows how to get the spotlight on his kid and all the players that he's brought in there. Big names, obviously. So, my thought here is he talked a lot of trash last season. At least it felt like he did. And or Shador and I wouldn't say Travis Hunter, but some of those other players had a lot to say on social media. But then this season comes around and they feel like a more humble team. They feel a little bit more quiet. I've listened to some podcasts with Shador on it, and they don't talk as much. Is that actually what's going on? Do they feel like last year what didn't go their way, and now they've got to kind of hold back their words until they start to win some games?
Man, this is a great question, Connor, because I think in some sense, yes. The way in which we've handled ourselves, I think, has been a little bit more controlled. Now, there has been some portions during the off season where I felt like we were more active on Twitter, just in some ridiculous ways. But I felt like that was kind of held back after a little while as we've gotten into summer camp, fall camp, all that, or summer conditioning. And I think even going into this matchup, I think there's less of like feeling like we have to, particularly with this one, feeling like we have an axe to grind or something. Like we just know that this is an intense rivalry. Both programs are good. And I will say that things change when you blow a 29-point lead to Stanford in the second half of a game. Like that is going to affect you uh, not only through the season but through the entire offseason. That has been something that has been on the mind of this team since that happened, and I think it has impacted them. I think even going back before the North Dakota State game, that was the first time we entered a matchup since the Stanford game as a favorite. So we had to prove to ourselves that, hey, we could get through that matchup. We could get that victory. Wish we would have covered, but it is what it is. We got the victory, and now we can kind of move on. But I do think, man, when you end on a 6 game losing streak and it starts in just terrible fashion, that does affect you. And I think there's been a more serious nature to how they've handled themselves this offseason getting ready for 2024.
Yeah, I respect it. It's a vibe that I could attract to more because I was like, this is more realistic to what I think a football team should be. They should be prove it on the field before you start running your mouth. Real quick, I want to pause for a couple comments. Husker Nation, thank you for gifting 10 Corn Craze memberships. I appreciate all the support. Mike, thank you for the $10 super chat. He says, my two favorite creators go big red. Actually, my chats aren't popping up on the screen. Give me 1 second. I'm going to pull these up really fast because I want to make sure they're shown. Let's see if this one
Good to see
comes.
you, Mike.
There it is, Mike. Thank you for the $10. And I saw another comment right here that I wanted to respond to. Badman BJ says, Shador never talked about Nebraska. WTF are you talking about? Well, first off, I never
Oh
said
no.
Nebraska. I said Shador talked tough all season long. But if we do want to go into what he said about Nebraska, he created this false perception that Nebraska disrespected the coach, that Nebraska disrespected their field. That was all nonsense. That's what I'm referring to. And I appreciate your comment, but I think it's clear that Shador ran his mouth a lot last season. Eh, yeah, a lot of your comments, bad man, I don't agree with. I'm not going to bring them all up right here, but I'm seeing some stuff that doesn't really resonate with me, although I am appreciative to have you in the chat. All right, so talking about last week with North Dakota State, I think there were a lot of expectations nationally that might have been underwhelming if you were a Colorado fan. Like you looked at what I don't want to say Joel Klatt since he's obviously a little bit more biased since he went there and he has a little bit more insight on the program, but other national media outlets, and they would say, Colorado's going to be a 4-win team again. They didn't really address their needs. They're not built to withstand an entire season. What was the Colorado fan reaction to that? Did they buy into the national hype, or were they more on the train of, Dion's going to get this fixed. He addressed more needs in the portal, and this is a, I don't know, 8+ win team?
And this is a great question because I do feel like there are different portions of the fan base that feel certain ways. I feel like mainly if you're gauging from Twitter, it might be a louder, much more confident than, hey, if you're going across the streets of Boulder just asking people what they expect for this season. But again, the biggest areas of issue and concern were the trenches, the offensive line being able to pass protect, especially, and of course establish a run, but also the defensive line was porous last year. Yes, it was very bad. So I felt like we improved those aspects, along with keeping and adding more speed to our outside positions at corner, at wide receiver. And so I think we've all expected, I think, like bowl game minimum for this team. Now, I'm a little less bullish on, hey, should we be entering right now as a conference favorite? No, I more so like the idea of being a conference dark horse for the Big 12. I think this matchup that we got against you guys this weekend is going to tell us a lot about kind of where we stand in the Big 12. The week one did crazy things happen. North Dakota State is a well coached, well disciplined team. I do believe that we were running a lot of vanilla stuff both on offense and defense, or at least that is my hope that we've been holding back for to open up things a little bit more against a tougher opponent in a tougher environment. But it like, dude, we haven't won a bowl game since Joel Klatt was quarterback here.
That's
Uh,
insane.
that that's the expectation. Like this year is to get there.
That's
Yeah,
fair.
and
So
hopefully win.
so the general consensus with fans is losses are acceptable this season and they are looking to build towards the future. We're not going off the crazy hype that some of the extremists put on Twitter.
No, no, no. Although I root for it, I mean, who doesn't root for their team to go undefeated? But
Of
at the end of the
course.
day, there's what? One team that ends up undefeated at the end of the
Right.
whole year, pretty much. Yeah, there's going to be some ups and downs. I'm really interested, Connor, to see how this team this year responds to setback, responds to disappointment. Because you could argue once we got punched in the mouth by Oregon, we
Season
never
changed.
truly responded. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to see us respond differently this year.
You know, I think last year, after that Oregon loss, things got really morbid around the Colorado fan base. You didn't have the excitement, the energy. It just felt like the season was dead for them. And I was like, man, why is it like this? And I think part of it's because a lot of those Colorado fans weren't really Colorado fans. They were there for the Dion hype. And as soon as that kind of drained out, they just weren't in it. Now you get it back. I look at the comments, people are all fired up. It's exciting. What's the energy after the North Dakota State win? Do people look at it as this is a team who, like you said, can get back to a bowl game? Are they a little bit more down on this team? Did they have higher expectations for how the line would play? What do you think the North Dakota State, close win did for the program?
I think like it still showed again, it still showed that this program as a whole is a work in progress. Like it really is. Now, it depends on what your expectations were going into this Nebraska game. Um or North Dakota State. I had them winning by double digits. Like that was my expectation. I felt like at the end of the day, they were a few plays away, but also North Dakota State was 10 seconds away from possibly beating us. We played a much better second half than we did first half, but
Much.
it really, yes, yes, much better, which is great. But you want to see us put together 4 quarters. I think that there is still some concern over the fan base. Can we put together 4 really solid quarters of football in all 3 phases of the game? But I will say when we're talking about the lines, both offensive and defensive lines, my expectation is just average. Can we get to average? We were national, uh, you know, at the end of the rankings when it came to national offensive and defensive line rankings. It's not reasonable, in my opinion, to think that these lines are going to go from absolute trash last year to absolutely elite.
True.
Can we get to average in those fronts? And if we can, I think we can be really competitive this year in a lot of our matchups. But even though we've had some issue running the ball against NDSU, we did a much better job in pass protection, which was great to see. Of course, you'd love to see it against an FBS opponent, more so week one, but you can't control that. One sack on the game. And the biggest thing that I took away, though Coach Prime, you wanted to see him manage that game at the end of the game a little bit better. We had 3 penalties, Connor. We won the penalty battle against North Dakota State. There might have been a game in which we had less penalties than maybe like Arizona State or Colorado State. But outside of that, you want to know how many penalties we averaged as a team last year? Unfathomable.
Were you in the
16.
double digits?
16. We averaged 16 penalties a game last year, Connor. It was absolute insanity.
So that's at least
So the
one
fact that we
takeaway where you're like, wow, this team might actually be able to do some things because they're not shooting themselves in the foot every damn time.
Yeah, yeah, no legal procedures. We had one guy lining up in the neutral zone, something like that. But
First game issues.
oh, yeah, yeah, the operation just in the discipline looked night and day different than from what we saw last year, which was just absolute chaos. Yeah, we're winning games at the beginning of the season, having like 14 penalties or something like that against TCU. It was insane.
You
It
know,
was insane.
I want to speak to last season. I'm going to bring up a super chat that's a question for you. But last
Yeah.
season, they started off the season hot against TCU and Nebraska. In my opinion, those two wins weren't really good wins. They were good wins for Colorado, but they weren't good wins that told you, well, this is a team who's going to be a top 25 and Pac-12 contender. Those were just games where they took advantage of weaker opponents, and I think it gave a lot of false hope, right? So last year, after beating Nebraska by 22 points, the fan base got crazy, the media got crazy at college game day on campus, and everyone thought Colorado was going to run the table. What do you think happens if Colorado does win this game? Are expectations going to go back through the roof? Does the national media take over and say, Shador and Travis are for real, which I do agree they are, and then say Dion's got this team fixed and corrected? Do you think it gets out of control again, or do you think we now see, because in the past they've had some issues, it stays a little bit more mellow?
I would love to give the media the benefit of the doubt to kind of stay a little even keel. There is no way in hell, dude, if we win this matchup, that they're not going like,
They're
oh my
looking
God,
for a
dude,
reason.
they're Big 12 contend. Yes, yes, they are. And while I haven't paid too much attention to the what national media is expecting from Nebraska outside of like the ridiculous comments that Paul Feinbaum made about Matt Rule, which is just stupid. You can discuss your strength of schedule or whatever. You can't control that. I could see scenarios where Nebraska is a 10-win team this year. So, which was not my expectation last year for Nebraska at all. I think they're a much tougher team than what we played last year, and obviously being on the road. So, if we are able to pull off this victory, this upset, according to Vegas. We'll see if they continue to move the line in your favor, which I would expect. Yeah, I think the media is just going to absolutely lose it because, in my opinion, I think that this is a better and a legitimate contender in the Big Ten this year, being Nebraska.
I like it. All right, I've got a super chat up here I want to get to. It is from Eric. He sent $5. Thank you for the support. Eric, he says, hey, brother GBR, they said it, but do you really think Colorado players are ready for this environment? This game has juice. I don't think they're ready. So go back to the game we saw last year in Boulder. I was there. You were there, obviously. The
Yeah.
energy was unmatched. I was at the LSU USC game a couple days ago. That was a playoff environment. But it didn't even have the juice that Colorado had when I went to that one. And that was a daytime
Wow.
game. It was a morning game. I think the kickoff was at like 10 a.m.
Oh,
People were going
so
crazy. So
yeah.
I'm not sure if you've been to a game in Nebraska, have you?
No.
So peak Nebraska, I've only seen it a few times in my lifetime. I'm 31 years old. I've been to, I'd say, three games that were major games that people actually cared about because they had the season still in play and there was a reason to get excited. Most Nebraska games over the last 10 years have just been kind of like, at home. You play Illinois or whoever, and you're like, no big deal. Or Nebraska's not even in contention to win anything serious, so you're like, no big deal. This one's got different swag, different energy to it. People are feeling themselves. The players obviously know and understand the meaning behind this game. When you have the national media who's hyping up a five-star quarterback at Nebraska who's proven almost nothing, and a Heisman contending quarterback in Shador and a Heisman contender in Travis, the whole world seems to be, once again, eyes on a Midwest school, just like they were Colorado, and people are really excited for it. With all of that comes a lot of fan energy. It comes a lot of pressure, comes noise. I mean, it's going to be loud in Nebraska. I've been to some big stadiums, but I can tell you Nebraska at its peak gets freaking loud. Top three in the whole country.
Yep.
Colorado played at TCU last year. Good environment, but I'm not sure if it was that crazy. They played at Utah last year. Again, good environment, but Colorado was like a 3-win team at that point or 4-win team. No one really cared. Coming into a situation like this, I don't know if any of these players have been, and at least any of the starters have been in a pressure moment or environment like that. Do you think they're going to handle it well? Do you think the team is preparing for it the right way? What's kind of the vibe?
I think we're going to handle it better than maybe some expect. I do think because we return the majority of our production and starters. Again, outside of the lines, pretty much everybody that we had is returning this year and went through that Oregon experience last year, for instance, which I think was, Oregon, like you said, is a very good environment. It's not 100,000 seat stadium, right? It's probably around the size more so of Folsom Field. It's a different environment going into Nebraska. I don't think that we've had since Prime's been at CU, our team has had the chance to play in an environment quite like Lincoln. You gotta hope that what we went through last year is going to benefit uh, us being able to handle that environment this year. But I can say I do think that um, for the most part, outside of getting punched in the mouth against Oregon, I think we've handled ourselves pretty well or our best players have handled themselves as well as they could, rather, in some of these tough situations. I don't think you're going to see Shador getting rattled. You're going to see Travis getting rattled. Any of those guys.
Well, those are
Maybe some.
elite players. I wouldn't think anything of them. It'd be more so the lines. Are they going to jump off sides
Yes.
or false starts? That's the concern.
I was going to say the offensive line is a group to take a look at with that because while Jordan C, man, I think I'm just about as happy as Jordan Seaton's performance last week as maybe you guys are about Dylan Raiola's performance last week against UTEP. He was fantastic. This is a whole different beast. We have essentially a new line this year outside of our starting center, who was a backup last year. So that is, we're going to see. We got a new offensive line coach, came over here from Oklahoma, Coach Phil Oldholt. Uh, this is a true test and it's going to tell us a lot about how we're going to be able to expect CU to handle themselves in some of these tough Big 12 environments when we go on the road as well. To give you an answer, I'm not totally sure. Outside that, I know 2 and 12 are going to be ready.
Yep, I agree with that. Brandon mentions, he says Shador has experienced that environment his whole life, way more than Raiola. I think 100%. I wouldn't compare Shador and Raiola at all. Anyone making that comparison, in my opinion, is a little ridiculous. The experience there is a 3-year
Yeah.
difference, okay? And then you have a guy who's going to be playing in the NFL. He's going to be a first-round draft pick next season. And Raiola, who could potentially be going into next year as a Heisman contender, but we have no idea yet. He's played against a really crappy UTEP team, and he only played for 3 quarters. So it's just way too
Yeah.
early to even compare those two. I don't think that's any question. Well, getting into this week, I want to talk about some of the matchups, the injury report.
Yeah.
I want to start with a question, though, from Nick. Nick says, what are your thoughts on Colorado's linebackers? It looks like they graded almost last in the nation in the North Dakota State game. And one thing I can add to this is the reason he's bringing it up, and one thing a lot of Nebraska fans are looking to, is Colorado last year didn't have a defensive line, and I'm not sure how good their linebackers were, but teams were able to run on them. This week,
Yes.
is that the concern for Colorado? They played a North Dakota State team who controlled the ball, who managed the clock extremely well, at least in the first half. And if they could have scored, one more touchdown in the third or fourth quarter, they would have won that game outright. So, what's the thought here?
Yeah, great question. If you're talking about our starting linebackers, our inside linebackers that we got, we normally run a 4-2-5, so having 2 linebackers out there, the same as we saw throughout the majority of last season. Trevor Woods, he was a converted safety halfway through the year, though. He's at now that 225-pound range, but seems that he lost a little bit of speed. Pair that with Levante Bentley, transferred from Clemson a couple years ago. Bigger guy, thumper guy, somebody who should be able to help in the run. I am a little concerned about our starting linebackers' ability to cover in space. I think that's an area that Nebraska could take advantage of, especially with a couple of the speedy running backs that y'all have. That could be an area that you guys target. We did bring in a transfer from Michigan/Charlotte, Nakai Hill Green. He was very good out in limited snaps. I would hope that we see more of him. But you're totally right. Like when you had a terrible defensive line play last year, uh, the linebackers weren't going to look good no matter what. Now, one thing that I did notice is that in some of the matchups that we had last year, like it was very clear that like Trevor Woods being a safety that dropped down to the linebacker position halfway through the year. Like he was targeted by teams in the run game last year. I felt like, especially in the second half, he did a great job, uh, staying in his gap, uh, manning his responsibilities there in the run game, and led our team in tackles. Now, uh, I really do think the game plan is going to be to stack the box against the run. I think they're going to want to put the pressure on Dylan Raiola to beat us with his arm. Create some stressful situations to where it's if Nebraska's going to beat us, it's because Dylan Raiola played great. I can live with that. What I can't live with is for y'all rushing for 250 yards against us. Inexcusable. So I would expect us to stress stopping the run. And if we got to take our chances in man coverage with your improved wide receiver core, that's just how it's going to be.
Yeah, and it feels like last season that's what Nebraska attempted to do. It obviously didn't work out. They had no pass game whatsoever, and then the turnovers obviously killed them over and over. So we never got
Yeah.
to really see what Nebraska wanted to do offensively since they just shot themselves in the foot over and over and over. But this year, I know for
Mhm.
sure the game plan, at least until Colorado knows they can stop it and puts everybody in the box, like you're saying, and challenges Dylan, I think Nebraska's going to try and run the ball at them over and over, and they're going to try and control that clock. I'm excited to see Raiola, though, against some good corners, and that kind of brings up my next question. They added a guy from Liberty. I can't remember his name off the top of my head.
Preston Hodge.
Preston Hodge, and then they've obviously got Travis Hunter. I'm not sure how confident they are in their safeties as cover guys, but I do know they play a lot of man to man, or they at least did last week. What's your read on these two corners versus Nebraska's new receiving core, who has Jamal Banks, 6'4", Isaiah Nayer, at least 6'3"? They're both 200 plus pounds. They're both fast enough. What's the thought here?
I do feel like we're stronger in our secondary this year. Outside of Travis, who is very hit or miss in our secondary, Preston Hodge, he's a very experienced player. He was one of the top graded corners in the entire FBS last year, or FBS because he was G5 last year. So I think he's a guy that could potentially get drafted based on the year that he has. Shiloh Sanders, I think that he's about average in covering, but somebody who, aside from kind of gaffes every now and then, I do feel like he's one of our more sure tacklers in space on the team. A big thing to watch is what's going on with our other starting safety position. Cameron Silman Craig, who tied for our lead in turnovers generated last year, he I think maybe played 4 snaps before suffering a little bit of a concussion against North Dakota State. He is one of our best players. And so if we can have him in coverage, I think that's going to be very helpful. If not, Vanderbilt transfer. Savion Riley is going to have to assume that position again. He's a bit of a question mark just because we haven't seen him on the field
Well, didn't
too much.
didn't
Yeah,
Savion play last week?
Savion did play last week, and it was a bit up and down. He had some great moments, but there was also struggling in run defense,
Yeah,
struggling with the read option, like going into the same gap as Trevor Woods for some reason. Like it didn't. Hopefully that can be cleaned
he
up, but
wasn't
he is
prepared to be
definitely
the starter for that game.
yes, exactly, and he got thrown in there. So I think there is going to be a little bit of up and down if he is starting, just as there are with any other like redshirt freshman playing. But I guess yeah, you're gonna see. I would expect us to see some more man coverage heavy this game, but my hope is that Robert Livingston is going to mix things up at least somewhat. Like give Dylan Raiola some different looks. Like let's try and disguise some coverages. Maybe go zone in some situations where he's not expecting. Let's essentially for like I felt like 80-90% of the game last week. I mean, it was just straight man coverage, single high safety,
Yeah,
and that's just what we were going to show NDSU, and that was it. And we were okay with having their quarterback. If he was going to beat us, that's just what was going to happen. But luckily, I feel like the talent different separation is what won us that game. We're going to have to be a little bit more crafty on the offensive and defensive game planning, wise for this to be a better outcome for us.
makes sense. Well, I want to pull up a super chat real quick. Rod Thank you a ton. You just gifted 50 Corn Craze memberships. I'll be at your tailgate this weekend. Guys, I'm going to the Nebraska game. My flight is actually at 5 a.m. I fly to Kansas City, then I drive up to Lincoln. So I get there around 2 o'clock on Friday. But I'm going to do one more live stream tomorrow to give you guys my prize picks. I'm going to go through the games for the entire week. And then I'm out to Rod's tailgate. I'll be at a couple other tailgates too. I got to check in on a bunch of my friends who I've met through this channel. But again, Rod, thank you a ton for your support. It means a lot. And then it looks like we just got another one. James gifted 50. I appreciate it a ton. I just messaged James the other day on Facebook because I was so surprised to see him back in here firing memberships. But, it's great when I get to see all the green names pop up. I get to feel like Pat McAfee a little bit. If you guys go and watch Pat McAfee's channel, he has his chat restricted to only members. It's pretty cool to see just solid green and people supporting me. So
Wow.
thank you a ton, both of you, for supporting the channel. It always means a lot. And Jim, thank you for the $11 super chat. He says, great guest, the rare but appreciated intelligent Colorado fan. Many good Nebraska Colorado games in my 77 years. Hope this one joins the list. And I want to speak to this really quick because I don't think he's taken a shot at Colorado fans here by saying the rare and appreciated intelligent Colorado fan. What's happened is over the last couple, or I guess really the last season, you've seen a lot of new Colorado fans come into the fold. People who buy into the Dion hype and the Shador and Travis stuff, which I love and I think is awesome. But sometimes they talk out of their ass and they say crazy stuff without having an education behind what they're saying. It's just, oh, well, I saw this highlight and I'm going to react to the highlight. And I saw everyone say Nebraska sucked, so I'm just going to say Nebraska sucks. But there's no logic or reasoning. It's just, let me react to clickbaity things. And that gets really annoying to Nebraska fans, at least, because we care so much about the details and the intricacies. Last year, you watched Nebraska lose to Colorado, and all of the Nebraska fans could accept and agree that our team was not prepared and not ready because, number one, they didn't have a quarterback who could play in that game. And then obviously the secondary got gashed over and over, and they had a new defensive coordinator, new head coach. It was just a new scheme they were trying to adjust to. But Colorado fans overhyped that win and made it sound like, well, we dominated Nebraska and we were so good. You weren't that good. It was just Nebraska was that bad. And so I think Jim's point here is we appreciate when a Colorado fan can be objective and can look at it through a clear lens and see it the way we do and not just overhype a team that has a great quarterback, a really flashy coach, and a really good receiver in Travis Hunter, and that they do have work to do. And they aren't the perfect angels that the fan base wants to believe they are. Anyway, I'll let you respond to that if you want to.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, I appreciate the kind words. This is a rivalry that I do really enjoy, and I think most of the time rivals they have a healthy amount of respect for each other. I think that hey, I tell Mike this all the time because he's in my chats and watching my videos. Is that you could argue that Nebraska was just a quarterback away last year, and one they get this year was a quarterback. I mean, it is a different game if you got a guy that can hold on to the football last year. It's just a different game. It's a much closer game, and that's why I'm expecting this to be a very close game till the end. Just like the pretty much the other recent matchups that we had in 2018 and 2019 have been as well.
That's fair. Well, I've got another question for you from Evan. He sent $10. He's a member, so we always appreciate the membership, and I appreciate the $10, Evan. He says, what do you think the minimum threshold CU will have to reach as far as passing yards or total offensive yards to beat Nebraska? And what about for Nebraska? I'll give the Nebraska response, but I'd like to know what you think about Colorado's threshold. Where do they need to get to?
Take this with a grain of salt. I'm just thinking about this right now, but I do think uh, we're not going to try and come out here and act like we're Nebraska. We thrashed your secondary last year. A lot of those guys have returned. You've talked about, hey, year two in the system, they could be better. I think, though, even though that's the case, that is definitely our easiest path to victory is by throwing the ball. We got more speed on the outside than what we had last year. I think that like running the ball is going to be done to complement setting up the pass. I just hope we can do it at just half a decent amount. So I do think that this is going to be a high scoring affair. I do think that this could be a game where both teams are scoring within the 30s, most definitely. So I'm going to say, hey, if we're not having a lot of passing yards or rushing yards, but we're putting up a lot of points, I think we got to throw for at least 400 yards.
I'm kind of in the same boat. I think Colorado's coming out air raid style. Last week against North Dakota State, they ran for what, 60 yards total? Don't quote me.
Yeah.
It was something extremely low. Neither of their running backs looked like starting running backs. They were just kind of in there as placeholders, like you said, to kind of change pace and make the defense or keep the defense on their toes. Shador is going to come out. He's going to test the defense like he did last year. They won a lot of matchups in zone, especially. They shredded Nebraska last year in zone. And even in man to man, I think they can win some, especially when you have those super talented and quick receivers. So I'm going to say Colorado's in the 400 plus yard range passing wise. I'm not sure they're going to cash in on all of those. Nebraska has a bend don't break defense. They have a really strong defensive line. And if they do get into the red zone, I think Nebraska could stop them, hold them to a couple field goals. On the Nebraska side, I don't know that their path to victory is to throw for a ton of yards or rush for a bunch of yards. I think their path to victory is to get a few stops on defense and to manage the clock. And I don't think they want to get into that shootout situation. I don't like saying it, but I do think if it did get down to being a shootout, I would probably take Colorado to win. I just think you got to trust the better QB receiver duo. I mean, trust the better receiver room with the quarterback, right? If you're in a shootout, you've got to trust which one's going to be able to get down the field in 30 seconds. I'd love to say I can trust Raiola, which I'm sure I would in the moment. But if I'm going to bet on one, I'm betting on the guy who we've seen do it before. We've watched Shador come back down like 21 to USC and almost win that game, right? So there have been times where they're in pressure situations and they come out, firing and successful. So we'll see. I'm not sure, Evan, if that answers your question. I think it's really two different styles and strategies for each of these teams. And for Colorado, they're going to have to accumulate those yards to win because I just think Nebraska's going to play a little bit of ball control. Moving on, I want
As
to
they
talk.
should.
I was speaking on running the ball, passing the ball. There was a receiver last year who did pretty well as a true freshman. I think he caught probably 250 yards. His name's Omarion Miller. He was potentially going to come play at Nebraska, actually. He was a pretty coveted recruit. And he ended up at Colorado. He was pretty hyped up this offseason. Obviously, that room's extremely deep. Will he be back in the rotation this week? Is he still injured? And are there other injuries that you're concerned about?
Yeah, last week it was more of the veteran guys. We had four seniors mainly out there. Omarion did have a handful of snaps, but it wasn't many. And by the way, he looked absolutely dominant blocking in some of those
He did.
situations. So I'm hoping that he should earn himself some targets, man. With how he blocked, I would like to see that. But we had Travis Hunter out there, and then our other three starting wide receivers were seniors. Will Shepherd transfer from Vanderbilt. LeJontay Wester, 100 catch, over 1,000 yard guy at FAU last year. And then Jimmy Horn, who, yeah, I believe he's here for his senior year. I could have that wrong, but I think he is a senior. So, yeah, like I would see us still leaning into just that experience. But if I think if there was a guy spot where you'll see Omarion kind of start taking some snaps away is maybe with Will Shepherd on the outside. They kind of play that same position, and I thought Will Shepherd's performance against NDSU left a lot to be desired for my expectation for a veteran coming in. There was just some things awareness wise that I just found to be unacceptable. But again, it is week one. We'll see what can happen. But he's somebody that I think is going to be featured as the year goes on. I think one thing with this offense is you're just going to pick and choose, or figure out who the defense is going to pick and choose that they're going to
Yeah.
focus on, and who they're going to have to be okay with being beat in the passing game. Maybe with I didn't go down your full roster, but I know some of the cornerbacks that y'all have are under 6 feet, so maybe that could play to Omarion's advantage if we have some of our taller guys out there. But I think you'll see him still in limited fashion this week. I think definitely going into this environment, Will Shepherd being a senior, playing in the SEC for 3 seasons, that should really benefit him,
And I
and
think he has the
benefit
size
the team.
advantage, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he's another 6'4" guy. Jimmy Horn, LeJontay Wester. I guess Jimmy Horn's more like 5'10", but LeJontay Wester's a speedy, quick guy. He's 6 feet. And then Travis Hunter, I think, is 6'1", something like that. So we got plenty of size. The difficulty, I feel like, and sorry, I don't mean to go too far ahead, is just, can Nebraska can we protect Shador long enough for Nebraska to have issues covering all four of these guys at the same time?
Well,
That's really going to be
th-
what the game comes down.
you read my mind because I've got a chat from Vince. Vince, thanks for being a member. I appreciate the support always. He says, what about sacks on Shador? And I think that's the question on everybody's mind. Is Shador going to be protected this week? And even if he isn't protected, will he be able to get the ball out? Will he be able to scramble around? My biggest fear as a Nebraska fan is watching what we saw last year. Nebraska gets pressure constantly. They beat the offensive line from all sides, all angles. They're blitzing like crazy. But Shador somehow Houdini's his way around and still finds a way to get the ball out on time. Do you think this is a
Yes.
concern, or do you think Shador is going to be able to make magic kind of like he did last season?
Uh, Man, I'm not a Colorado fan if I'm not telling you I don't believe Shador can do it again, make that pocket magic. I think that we have an improved offensive line. Again, don't mistake that for me saying we have an elite offensive line. We
Understood.
were terrible last year. I think we can have somewhere ranked around 70 in terms of our offensive line performance in the passing game nationally this year. Like that's a 50 spot jump, which I feel like is very significant. I think we can kind of be around there when it comes to the pass protection. The biggest thing that I noticed, Connor, last year we had Bill O'Boyle, offensive line coach. He's now at Northwestern, but my nickname for him was Bill. None of my guys know their assignments. O'Boyle. None of our guys knew their assignments. We were terrible at handing off stunts, dealing with any sort of exotic blitz look. The communication, it just wasn't there. Uh, Even though there were some situations that led to, I forget how many pressures were credited to the offensive line. I think Shador was responsible for about a third of them last week from PFF. So take that for what it's worth. But the biggest thing that I noticed was, hey, there were some plays in which we were getting beat, but there wasn't anything where we had like three guys on our own offensive line blocking each other like we got, and then we got two guys from UCLA just running free at Shador. They were able to understand what was going on, maybe not physically always deal with the stunts well, but hand them off. Like they understood what they were doing. And again, I don't think we had a holding penalty. I don't think we had like a false start at all.
So
So again, going into a road environment,
they're
we'll
fixing the
see what
little
happens.
things, basically, is what you're saying with this new coaching situation.
Yeah, so we should know our assignments, but Nebraska is a whole nother level of strength than NDSU,
Oh
and
yeah,
this is again, it's the biggest question mark, which comes down to this game is can they protect enough? Shador's going to be slippery. That's just how he's going to be. I think the majority of the hits that he took was because escaping the pocket after having 2.5 seconds back there to
yeah.
kind of dissect. But he's a big play quarterback. Yes, we had a 17 play, 8 minute drive where he's just cutting guys in by like 6 yard throws. But Shador's always looking for the home run play. That's what he's all about. So he's going. It's just part of his game. He is willing to take hits if he's going to be able to have those shots downfield.
I love it. We've got another one regarding the trenches. First, let me tell you about this guy. This is Todd. Thank you, Todd, for the $10 super chat. Thank you for being a member. He's one of my friends, and I've built a friendship with him because he started sending me super chats so often, like big ones, like hundreds of dollars. And I was like, man, I got to get this guy a hoodie. He's supporting the channel so much every single game. There was a point last year where he was giving me $100 per sack by Nash Hepmaker. Okay. So Todd's awesome. So we talk all the time. We're friends now. He's a farmer up in South Dakota. This dude is such a Nebraska fan. He can't even watch all the games, but he's sitting there in his combine or tractor, whatever he's doing, working the fields in the morning. And he's got his Nebraska or his Corn Craze hoodie on, and he's sitting there listening to the game on the radio. And then he'll be texting me during the game saying, hey, how'd the play look? I'm listening to it on the radio. So he's locked in, Nebraska fan, but he's got a family, he's got his farm, he's got to lock in and work. So he's the epitome of what it means to be a football fan up there in the Midwest. Anyway, Todd, thanks for being here. He says, we have to run the clock with runs for sure. Just jumping in, do you think Colorado's trenches are improved or as improved as advertised? And I think a question I kind of want to add in here is Colorado added in a couple guys from the transfer portal at defensive end. And supposedly they were going to make a big impact and they were going to change this defensive front because last year they weren't that effective. Did you see improvement from the defensive front, from the defensive ends, from the transfers they brought in on defense, or was there not enough from that first game?
Yeah, again, this isn't going to be something that really showed up on the sack or on the stat sheet. I can't remember how many sacks we had.
I can
Maybe
tell you,
two,
I'll tell
four.
you, I'll tell you
Yeah.
right now. Colorado
Okay.
had Levante Bentley and
Sure.
Shidozi Nwanko each had a sack. So that was two of them, and they
Okay.
had 7 tackles for loss.
Okay. Tackles for loss. But yes, Chidoze, we actually have, a heartbeat in the interior now. This was something where our interior line was just absolutely paper thin last year. Chidoze coming over here from Houston, like he was what I was hoping for what we were getting, like a really solid, experienced player that isn't going to be pushed around. And he's a little bit shorter. He's like 5'10", close to 300 pounds now, but wrestling background, so a little bit shorter, center of gravity, all of that. So it kind of makes him a little hard to move out of the way. I thought he performed really, really well. Now, with the edge positions, we brought in two of Pitt's best edges. Dayon Hayes, who starts for us, number 50, and Samuel Okunloa, who also started last week, number 93. I thought that their performances were okay in terms of the pass rush. I think that again, there just weren't sacks really in this game. I think the refereeing was uh, they were letting them play, man. And also I think that North Dakota State's offense, it was, first read there. If not, like that quarterback can take off, and we didn't even have a spy on him throughout most of the game. So they were getting the ball out of his hands quickly, and that really alleviates a pass rush, right? I thought that they were playing very within themselves and to game plan. Now, again, if you're able to get the ball out of Dylan Rayola's hands quickly in this game, and I think working off of play action is really going to benefit you guys doing that. Like, I don't think you'll see much from the edges, but we do have, I think, Dayon Hayes, as well as an all conference guy in the Pac 12, BJ Green, transfer from Arizona State, who ended up playing much more in the second half instead of Samuel Okunloa. Both of them, I thought, did a much better job, not only holding the edge in the run game, but generating some pressure. So, uh, again, I think North Dakota State is obviously not Nebraska, but I do wonder, Connor. This is a question that I have for you. It's with your backup left tackle. I mean, when I've looked at his performance throughout his career, I was seeing some CU 2023 level grades on his performance. I'm wondering if we do get into some scenarios where you guys are going to have to pass the ball. Is that a matchup to where CU's edges can take advantage of the fact that you guys have your backup left tackle out there right now?
So I want to remove the word backup. He earned the starting job actually, and the
Oh,
start.
for real?
Yeah, so the starter from last year who went down in preseason or in fall camp, he was actually slated to be the backup to Turner Corcoran. And Turner, for whatever reason,
Okay.
earned that job, right? So we as fans don't know what happened, but obviously you'd have to assume he made some sort of jump, some sort of improvement. And it wouldn't be foreign for this Nebraska offensive line coach. He actually came in, and I don't want to use the word fix, but he did fix Nebraska's right tackle, Bryce Benhart, who was a 4-star offensive lineman coming out of high school. Never really did much at Nebraska in his earlier part of his career. And then when he got with this new offensive line coach, Donovan Raiola, he took a huge step.
Yeah.
And now they're talking about him being a
Okay.
potential 5th round pick coming into this season. And then this year, obviously, he could improve based on that. So there could be some improvement that went on this fall camp. And now Turner Corcoran isn't the liability he was in the past. We've talked about
Okay.
how he had so much pressure on him. He had multiple injuries early on in his career. He was super highly touted coming out of high school. He's from Kansas, 4-star, started a game as a true freshman, and then things just unraveled. And like you said, the pass blocking grades were abysmal for him. I think he was ranking like dead last in the entire country for starting Power 5 tackles. So hopefully he has fixed some of those issues since he earned that job, but it is something of concern. And if I'm a Colorado coach, I'm for sure going to say, well, let's line up whoever our best pass rusher is on him and test him because you don't know if he's fixed them. Against UTEP, he looks good. Against UTEP, he graded, I think, second or third for the entire offensive line. So there was hope and there's promise, but UTEP's defensive ends, I think one of them was an NFL guy, but the other one, I'm not sure if he's that same caliber. So it's really hard to make an assessment off that first game. I think that's kind of where I'm going with it. It's let's wait and see. Let's not get too excited based on that first performance, but let's also acknowledge that there was some improvement and he might not be the liability he once was.
Handled business.
That's it. Prove it on the field, and then we'll start talking about you positively, right?
No
So
doubt.
here's another question from James. James, thank you for this question. This is a great one that I almost forgot to ask, and I didn't include it in my notes. So he saved me because this is one of the most important questions that I had when I was laying in bed last night thinking about what I wanted to talk about you with. He says, are you concerned with how much Travis Hunter is on the field?
Not week 2. Now, if we're talking about making it through an entire college football season healthy, that's really something that he hasn't done yet. And you can make the excuses. He came back from surgery early his true freshman year. That was a freak hit by Henry Blackburn at
Mm-hmm.
CSU last year, lacerated liver, like whatever. It's just when you play that many amount of snaps, you just open yourself up to a higher probability of freak stuff happening. I think it's very clear though that the coaching staff isn't concerned. As a fan, I have a little bit different of a perspective that it's like, hey, it would be nice to. I think we have the depth at the wide receiver position to spell him a little bit. But as you saw on display last Thursday, the chemistry that Shador and Travis have, it's just on a total other level compared to our other wide receivers. It is insane how they can read each other
It's
and
almost like they're
communicate with
related.
each other. Yeah. Yes, it totally is. So I understand why the coaching staff is like, nah, like he is conditioned well enough to do this. So we're a better team with him on the field every play. That's what we're gonna do. I get it. But if he does get hurt, that's just going to be something you hear in draft season of can this guy stay healthy throughout a season? That's it. It might minimally impact his draft stock, but yeah, I think it also depends on do you feel like he's a better wide receiver or corner? I go back and forth on this all the time, but I'm starting to kind of think that he might actually be a better wide receiver. So maybe we
I
just spell him at corner a little bit.
I think he's a better receiver. There's a Colorado
Yeah.
fan in the chat who's been bringing a bunch of stuff up. I've been seeing it pop up, haven't addressed any of it yet, but he says, referring to Nebraska's defensive backs. He says, who
Yes.
is your best DB that is going to try and stop Travis? Then who's going to stop Jimmy? Will Shep, LeJontay West. Who do you have that can cover them? And I want to respond to this because, Brandon,
Yes.
I understand your sentiments. Last year, Nebraska got torched repeatedly in the secondary. And I don't know how much better that secondary is this year than they were last year. And I don't know how much better they'll handle this Colorado passing game. But I do think that's part of the reason this spread is so close. Colorado has an elite passing game. There is no question they are going to be able to score. Will they be able to score 35 plus? I can't say that. But we do know Nebraska is mismatched in that area of the game. Nebraska's weakest part of their defense is the secondary, at least it has been over the last year. So hopefully they clean some things up. I don't know that Nebraska's secondary is going to be able to shut them down completely, but because they have a talented defensive line and a talented linebacker core, and the defensive coordinator for Nebraska is a great X and O guy, they're going to have a scheme that slows some things down. And I'm guessing they aren't going to have that explosive offense they had last year. It'll look something closer to what we saw in the first half of that game when I think Colorado only scored 7 points on a long sustained drive. I think the other points they scored were on a short field because Jeff Sims fumbled it. So, yes, that is the mismatch. That is what everyone's banking on. All the Colorado fans are banking on the Colorado receiving core to exploit the Nebraska secondary. But man, it's been an hour. I know you've got to get out to your other show. David, it's been awesome having you here. And I think all of us, I can speak for all of us, that we learned a lot more about Colorado from listening to what you had to say.
And Connor, this was a pure joy, man. I'm bummed our time is over because sometimes, man, I can just get so burnt out from all the hyperbole, the sensationalism, like with everything, man. It's so nice to just talk football, talk strategy, and you're right, man. It's gonna come down to which team is gonna exert their will with their style of play more. Is Nebraska gonna kick our ass up front? Or are we just going to be able to, just hold that defensive line at bay just enough to have that repeat of the secondary performance last
Yep.
year. We're gonna find out. But I know you're expecting Nebraska to win, and I'm expecting Colorado to win. So hey, man,
Well,
may
hey,
the best
wait.
team win.
I want to make sure. I don't want you to get out of here too quick. You've got to end this with your score prediction for the game. And I'm going to give you mine first. My official
Okay.
score prediction on my channel was, I think, 31-24. Now, after our discussion, I actually think my score prediction is going to change a little bit. I might actually have Nebraska winning this by 10-14. But I want to hear what you have to think.
And I think these matchups have always been close. And again, I still would count last year's matchup as close until things just got out of hand with Jeff Sims. That was going to be a close game. I think that this is going to be another close game. Um, I do think that Nebraska should be favored coming into this game, rightfully so, with them handling UTEP. But my whole thing on the season, man, is if we can keep teams for the most part under 30 points, we'll win. So I'm going with 31-28, baby, and a nail biter at the end of the game, as usual.
All right. Well, David, I love it. I'm excited. I hope you get to watch it from home in a really good setting where no one's bothering you. There's no nonsense. You get to be locked in and focused because that's how I like to watch them. I, on the other hand, will be in a stadium with 90,000 Nebraska fans who are turned out of their minds. I won't be able to yell myself because I've got to preserve my voice for my post game reaction, but I will enjoy the vibes for you. And again, I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your insights. So, with all that, thanks for coming.
Absolutely. Let's hope we renew this rivalry so the next time we talk isn't all the way in 2031. Like, let's get this thing a bit sooner.
Absolutely. All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, y'all.
And for all of you who joined me tonight, I appreciate the support a ton. Tons of super chats, tons of members in the chat. Tomorrow, I'm going to be back with one more live stream to give you all my picks for the weekend, talk about what my plans are for the game, to give you kind of some insight onto where I'll be. I've got a little bit of an idea for the weekend, but it's very vague, and I'm sure it'll develop more once I'm actually in Lincoln on Friday. But with all that, thank you again for coming. Thank you for supporting our guest. Go check out his channel. I actually am going to link him in our description box below, but I think you can also click his name in the title. But yeah, with all that said, thank you for being here. I'm going to see you in the next one tomorrow. Go Big Red.